Back on Cavuto, Coast to Coast, the current president, President Obama, certainly made some headlines with these comments saying that he would have won a third term. Listen.
I am confident in this vision because I'm confident that if I had run again and articulated it, I think I could have mobilized a majority of the American people to rally behind it.
There's a response to that, as you might expect, from the president-elect on, of course, Twitter. Donald Trump saying President Obama said that he thinks he would have won against me. He should say that, but I say no way. Jobs are leaving, ISIS, Obamacare, etc. So as we talk about the markets and the state of them and this run to 20,000, what about the idea that investors are welcoming change, and it is about a new president and president-elect being put in place? From the state of Ohio, Ohio State Senator Capri Cafaro is with us today. Conservative commentator Gina Loudon is also with us today, as is Vote America Now President Chris Prudhome. So good to talk to all three of you. I think I'll start, Capri, I'll start with you. I mean, to me, more than anything else, this comment is, and I know the president went on to say, oh, I respect Hillary Clinton and everything else. That is a dig at Hillary Clinton, saying she's an awful candidate. I would have beat this guy, and she couldn't. But what did you take away from it, and does it matter at all?
That was my read as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton was a uniquely flawed candidate, you know, with baggage that certainly President Obama does not have. You know, I'm sure that my colleagues that are going to be on or with me are going to say, absolutely, you know, he's got all these issues with Obamacare and this and that. So, you know, he wouldn't have had a mandate this time around. But it's hard to say. Honestly, it's a pointless kind of conversation because, you know, he couldn't run anyway. But, you know, I think that because Hillary Clinton was a flawed candidate, and if Barack Obama was able to hold together somehow his original coalition, particularly with high-performing African-American votes in areas like Michigan and Pennsylvania, it could have made the difference in the Electoral College. But,
it might have.
Again, speculation is kind of pointless.
Now, I will say, yes, it is. But, Capri, work with us. It's a holiday week. We just spent 15 minutes speculating if the Dow's going to hit, you know, 20,000. Please, God, let us talk about something else. So even if it is this. You know, but I know Capri's point is a fair one, Gina, that it is kind of pointless to speculate because he wasn't allowed to run for a third term. But at the same time, it's sort of interesting. What do you take away from this? Because as I said a moment ago, a lot of the run-up in the stock market is, you know, people tell us at least, because Donald Trump's going to be president. There's a lot of optimism about that. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I think it would have been great. He could have turned California red. Stock market could be even more on fire once Trump were elected. I'm kidding, totally. Let's look at the facts. Obama lost more than 1,000 Democrat governorships and state legislative seats for his party. This is not a record of winning. I understand that he used gender and class and every other sort of division that he could possibly think of to win twice. And I think that the American people are completely over that. When he would continue, as we know he would have, to win, to talk about, tell people how police are destroying our country and everything is their fault, and how basically anyone who doesn't fit in one of his special classes should just go away, or what bathrooms we should be using. I just don't think those are winning topics anymore in America. I think that we have come to our senses finally, and we want to talk about jobs and the economy and national security, and I think that's what the American people spoke about. And I don't think Obama has any plans to do any of the above.
What do you think, Chris?
You know, certainly President Obama, of course, he's leaving the White House. At the end of the day, for him to make that kind of a statement, I think it's time to bring people together. It's time to bring our nation together. I have personal friends now that I can say who their health care has increased by $250, $300 because of his Obamacare. So at the end of the day, this is a different type of America. This is a different nation now. It's time that we all come together, embrace each other and our thoughts and values.
Different type of nation. Let me stop you, Chris, for a second. That is becoming more optimistic about a change in power. Is that what you're getting at, or?
Well, absolutely. I think absolutely. What has happened, obviously, in this election is a different type of election. Trump broke into the blue wall. He rose up a group of individuals who may normally not vote. And at the end of the day, people are frankly just tired of the political process. They're tired of politicians. Right. And President-elect Trump came off in a whole different, enthusiastic. He came off in a fun and just that's a genuine way. Now, granted, people may not like certain things he says and how he says it, but at the end of the day, his demeanor and his approach is just different, and that's how he's forming.
There's an op-ed in the New York
People
Times
want
about
change,
just
that's
that
for
this
sure.
morning, that they, even though they didn't like some of the things he said, they still voted for him, right? Because they thought he was a better pick, at least the people who mattered in the states that mattered, than Hillary Clinton would have been. The question, I guess, Capri, is that an indictment of the Obama policies or an indictment of Clinton, the candidates? So.
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest.
Right.
And I think that it's not even just about President Obama and his policies. It is about the Democratic Party. When Gina was talking about the fact that we've lost like 1,000 seats, we need to have some soul searching. We need to really focus on the messages that are important to the majority of Americans, and that is the economy.
You wonder if that'll happen with these types of comments. Gina, last word on that about the. I wonder if the Democrats will do some real soul searching.
No, it's funny they haven't. I think Capri is so right, and I've heard a lot of Democrats point to that, except for the ones who need to be looking in the mirror the most. I think that Hillary Clinton needs to be looking in the mirror. I think that Barack Obama, they could do a lot to lead their party back to the party that had some values and had some points that they could run on. Right now, they are a party of division, and Americans see through it.
We're going to move on, guys, but I'm going to say I'm going to be the one to judge this. And despite Capri's comments at the beginning, I did not think this was a pointless conversation at all. So
hey, it's always fun. It's fun. Why not?
Thanks, guys. Have a great new year and all the rest. But thank you very much for coming on with us. We appreciate it.